The cold was the first thing she remembered, a living entity that gnawed at the edges of her world. It was a cold that had nothing to do with the snow biting at her bare feet or the wind that tore through her thin birthing gown. This was a cold of the soul, a frost that bloomed from the heart of her husband, King Leopold, and now threatened to consume her and the 3 impossibly small lives she held bundled against her chest. 6 days. It had been 6 days since the maesters had pronounced her delivered of 3 healthy daughters, their cries thin but fierce in the cavernous stone chamber of the castle. And for 6 days, the king's silence had been a gathering storm. Now, the storm had broken. Queen Genevieve stumbled, her knee striking a rock hidden beneath the snow. Pain, sharp and crystalline, shot up her leg, but she did not cry out. She bit her lip until she tasted blood, the coppery tang a shocking warmth in the frozen air. She could not fall. In her arms, wrapped in a single linen sheet that was already stiffening with ice, were Serafina, Isolde, and Alara. Her daughters. Her burdens. Her death sentence. Faster, woman, Leopold snarled from behind her. He was not cold. He was wrapped in thick furs, his breath pluming before him like the smoke of a dragon. His face, usually florid and self-satisfied, was a mask of pinched fury, his eyes narrowed against the swirling snow. The border is just ahead. We will be rid of this shame and back to a warm fire before midnight. Shame. The word echoed in the desolate landscape. It was the name he had given them. Not his children, but his shame. His failure. For 20 years of marriage, he had prayed for a son, an heir to carry his name and his crown. He had made offerings, consulted soothsayers, blamed Genevieve's supposedly barren womb. And when the gods had finally answered, they had mocked him with a trio of girls. Useless. He had spat the word on the stone floor of the nursery, the sound cracking like a whip. Useless burdens. Genevieve's arms ached, a deep, burning throb that had long since passed beyond mere fatigue. The babies were so light, yet they felt heavier than the world. She could feel the faint, fluttering warmth of their bodies through the thin cloth, a desperate, flickering trinity of candles against the gale of her husband's hatred. She shifted her hold, trying to shield them better from the wind that clawed at them, a predator seeking to steal their breath. One of them, perhaps Isolde, let out a tiny, mewling cry, a sound so fragile it was nearly lost in the howl of the wind. The sound snagged Leopold's attention. He strode forward, his heavy boots crunching on the icy crust of the snow. He grabbed Genevieve's shoulder, his fingers digging into her flesh like talons. "Silence that creature," he hissed, his face close to hers. The smell of spiced wine on his breath was a vile contrast to the clean, sterile air. "I will not have this farce prolonged by their squawking." "She is cold, my lord," Genevieve whispered, her voice cracking. "She is a newborn. They are all." "They are nothing," he cut her off, his voice flat and final. He shoved her forward, toward a line of ancient, gnarled pine trees that marked the edge of his kingdom. Beyond them lay the grey marches, a land of mist and shadow, a place from which no one returned. It was the domain of myth and monsters, ruled, the legends said, by a vampire king who had held dominion over the mountains since before Leopold's ancestors were dust. "This is where your lineage ends, Genevieve. In the snow. Forgotten." He was a man casting off a spoiled garment, not a father abandoning his children. There was no flicker of doubt in his eyes, no trace of remorse. Only the cold, hard certainty of his own wounded pride. He saw them not as flesh of his flesh, but as a cosmic insult, a verdict on his inadequacy. And for that, they had to be erased. Genevieve looked down at the 3 small heads nestled in the crook of her arm. Serafina, the firstborn by a minute, was eerily still, her tiny face serene as if in acceptance. Isolde, the crier, was squirming, a fighter even now. And Alara, the last, was watchful, her dark eyes wide and unblinking, seeming to absorb the terrible, grey light of the world she had only just entered. A fierce, impossible love surged through Genevieve, a fire in the centre of the encroaching ice. It was a useless love. It could not warm them. It could not save them. But it was all she had. "Please, Leopold," she begged, her voice a thread of sound. It was the last time she would ever plead with him. A cottage. A convent. Anywhere. Just let them live. He laughed, a harsh, grating sound that the wind snatched and tore to shreds. And have them surface in 20 years, 3 inconvenient claims to a throne that will belong to my true son? I am not a fool, madam. I am a king. And a king prunes his family tree. He gestured to the mist-shrouded forest. There. Leave them. Your duty is done. Her legs refused to move. Her body, which had betrayed her by bearing daughters, now staged its own small rebellion. She would not take another step. She would die here, with them, a frozen monument to his cruelty. She sank to her knees, the impact jarring her teeth, and curled her body around the precious bundle, making herself a final, futile shield. The snow began to fall thicker, faster, weaving a white shroud around them. Leopold's face contorted with impatience. So be it. Die with them. A fitting end for a barren queen and her litter. He turned to leave, to walk back to his warm castle and his waiting fire, to the life he would build on the foundations of their graves. But he stopped. His head tilted, listening. A sound, or rather, the absence of it. The wind, which had been a constant, shrieking companion, had fallen silent. The snow seemed to hang suspended in the air. The world held its breath. From the mists that coiled between the ancient pines, a figure emerged. He did not walk so much as glide, a column of darkness against the suffocating white. He was tall, impossibly so, and wrapped in a cloak the color of a starless midnight. His face was pale, carved from marble and ancient sorrow, and his eyes held the deep, cold fire of dying embers. He moved with a grace that was utterly inhuman, a predator in his own domain. Genevieve had heard the tales. Every child in the kingdom had. Cassius, the vampire king, the eternal warden of the grey marches. He was a story to frighten children into obedience, a spectre of the dark. But the being standing before them was no story. He was a presence that bent the very air around him, a being of immense and terrible power. Leopold, to his credit, showed no fear, only arrogance. He drew himself up, puffing out his fur-clad chest. You trespass, creature. This is the border of my kingdom. Turn back, lest you taste good human steel. The vampire king did not look at Leopold. His gaze, heavy with the weight of centuries, was fixed on Genevieve and the bundle in her arms. There was no menace in his eyes. There was something else, something she could not name. A profound weariness. A flicker of recognition. I have watched your kingdom for 1,000 years, Leopold, Cassius said. His voice was not loud, but it resonated in the sudden stillness, seeming to come from the stones and the trees themselves. It was the sound of gravel shifting in a deep riverbed. I have watched your line rise from mud-hut chieftains to petty kings. I have watched your cruelty, your greed, your pathetic grasping for a legacy you do not deserve. He took another silent step forward. The cold emanating from him was different from the cold of the weather. This was the cold of the grave, the absolute zero of a life long since divorced from the sun. This, Cassius said, his eyes finally moving to Leopold, and now the embers within them glowed brighter, a dangerous, burning red, is a new low, even for you. Leopold scoffed, a nervous tremor finally entering his voice. He was a bully, and bullies were only brave when their victims were helpless. They are my property, to do with as I please. 3 useless girls. A flawed queen. I am cleansing my house. He gave a dismissive wave of his hand, a gesture of profound contempt. Take the trash if you want it, leech. They will likely last you a night. The insult hung in the frozen air, obscene and glittering. For a moment, Cassius did not move. He simply stood there, a statue of judgment. Then, the world shook. It was not a tremor in the earth, but in the air. A sound that started as a low growl deep in the vampire king's chest and swelled into a roar of pure, undiluted fury. It was a sound of mountains breaking, of glacier carving into a black sea. It ripped through the stillness, shaking the snow from the trees and vibrating in the very marrow of Genevieve's bones. Leopold stumbled back, his face draining of all color, his arrogance finally shattering like thin ice. I will take them. The words were not a request, nor an acceptance of an offer. They were a pronouncement. A verdict. A claim. Before Leopold could even draw a breath to scream, Cassius was moving. He crossed the space between them in a blink, a blur of black against the snow. He did not spare the human king a glance. He knelt before Genevieve, his immense form eclipsing the dying light. She flinched, expecting a blow, a bite, the end. Instead, she felt an impossible gentleness. His hands, long-fingered and pale as bone, reached for her. They were not the cold, dead things of legend. There was a current running through them, a strange, thrumming energy. He did not touch the babies. He touched her. His fingers brushed her frozen cheeks, and then carefully, reverently, he gathered her and her children into his arms. He scooped them up from the snow as if they weighed nothing, as if they were the most precious things in the world. He drew the edges of his vast cloak around them, enveloping them in a sudden, shocking darkness. It was not a frightening dark. It was a shield. The wind ceased its assault. The biting cold vanished, replaced by a strange, still warmth that seemed to emanate from the very fabric of the cloak, from the body of the creature holding them. Inside this sanctuary, the world fell away. Genevieve could hear the frantic, terrified pounding of her own heart, and beneath it, the slow, steady, impossible beat of his. One of the babies, Ilara, sighed in the sudden warmth, a sound of pure contentment. Cassius rose to his full height, a dark angel cradling a mortal queen and her rejected miracles. He turned his head, and over the top of Genevieve's hair, he fixed his glowing red eyes on the trembling, pathetic figure of King Leopold. "You have cast away your treasure, mortal," Cassius' voice rumbled, a promise and a curse. "And one day, you will beg for the mercy they will not have been taught to give." He turned his back on the sputtering king and walked into the mists from which he had come. He did not look back. He carried his new family away from the world that had tried to kill them, and into the heart of the night. Genevieve, held securely against a chest that should not have a heartbeat, looked down at her daughters, their faces peaceful in the sheltered dark. They were not burdens. They were not trash. They were survivors. And their story, she knew with a certainty that thawed the last of the ice around her heart, was only just beginning. The journey into the grey marches was a passage through a dream. Genevieve was aware of movement, a swift, silent gliding over terrain that should have been impassable. The mists swirled around them, a protective veil that muffled the world, and within the sanctum of Cassius' cloak, the only reality was the warmth, the darkness, and the steady, rhythmic power of the being who carried them. She must have slept, for she awoke not to the biting wind of the mountains, but to the scent of dry stone, ancient dust, and something else, something like dried roses and old parchment. Cassius had not set her down. He stood in the center of a vast, circular hall, the scale of which dwarfed any throne room she had ever seen. The ceiling was lost in shadow, but moonlight, impossibly bright, streamed through a crystal dome far above, illuminating a floor of polished black obsidian that reflected the stars. There were no torches, no candles, yet the hall was filled with a soft, silvery luminescence. Bookshelves carved into the stone walls rose for hundreds of feet, crammed with leather-bound tomes. It was not a fortress, it was a library, a sanctuary of knowledge. Castle Nocturne, the heart of Cassius' domain, was a place of silence and contemplation. He finally lowered her to her feet, his movements deliberate and careful. She swayed, her legs weak, and his hand shot out to steady her, his touch a firm, cool pressure on her arm. The babies, still bundled against her, began to stir and fuss, their small cries echoing in the immense space. "They are hungry," Genevieve said, the words feeling clumsy and loud in the profound quiet. Panic fluttered in her chest. She had nothing for them. Her milk had barely come in, her body still weak and traumatized. "All is provided for," Cassius said simply. He led her from the great hall, down a corridor carved from the same living black stone. The air grew warmer, and the scent of wood smoke and roasting meat reached her. It was a startlingly human smell in this inhuman place. He pushed open a heavy oaken door, revealing a suite of rooms that took her breath away. A fire blazed in a hearth large enough to roast an ox. Rich tapestries depicting constellations she did not recognize covered the walls. A massive bed was piled high with furs, and beside it, 3 masterfully carved cradles of dark wood waited, each lined with the softest black velvet. And on a table before the fire, a feast was laid out, bread still warm from the oven, cheese, roasted fowl, and a pitcher of what looked like milk, steaming gently. More astonishing was the woman who rose from a chair by the fire. She was old, her face a roadmap of wrinkles, but her eyes were sharp and intelligent. She wore the simple grey dress of a servant, yet she carried herself with an air of quiet authority. "Ileana," Cassius said. "This is Queen Genevieve. And these are her daughters." The old woman curtsied, a gesture of deep respect. "My lord. Welcome, your majesty." Her gaze fell upon the squirming bundle, and her stern face softened into a look of profound tenderness. "Oh, the poor lambs. Let me take them. You must be exhausted." Genevieve hesitated, her arms instinctively tightening. She had not let them go since their birth. They were a part of her. "Ileana was my own nurse, many centuries ago," Cassius said, his voice soft. "There is no one in this world I trust more. They will be safe." The quiet conviction in his voice was more persuasive than any command. Slowly, reluctantly, Genevieve allowed the old woman to take the children. Ileana handled them with an expertise that was both practiced and loving, cooing to them in a language Genevieve didn't understand, her gnarled fingers impossibly gentle as she unwrapped them from their stiff, frozen linen. She clucked her tongue at the sight of their red, raw skin, but her movements were efficient. She bathed them in a basin of warm, herb-scented water, dressed them in soft woolen gowns that had clearly been waiting for them, and then, with a small silver spoon, began to feed them the warm milk from the pitcher. They drank greedily, their cries subsiding into soft, contented gurgles. Genevieve watched, mesmerized. The scene was so domestic, so normal, it felt surreal. Just hours ago, she had been kneeling in the snow, preparing to die. Now she was in a warm room, watching her children being cared for by a woman who had nursed a vampire. She felt a wave of dizziness, and Cassius was there again, guiding her to a chair. "Eat," he commanded gently. "You need your strength." She did as she was told, her body screaming for sustenance. The food was simple but exquisitely prepared. As she ate, the exhaustion of the past week crashed down on her. She felt her eyelids growing heavy, her head drooping. Through a haze of fatigue, she saw Cassius lift one of his new daughters from her cradle. It was Serafina, the quiet one. He held her in the palm of one enormous hand, his long, pale finger stroking her tiny cheek. The expression on his ancient face was one of absolute awe, a wonder so profound it seemed to erase 1,000 years of sorrow. He was not a monster. He was a savior. And in that moment, Genevieve knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that she had not brought her children to a monster's lair to be devoured. She had brought them home. The years that followed bled into one another, marked not by seasons, for in the heart of the grey marches, it was always a serene, moonlit autumn, but by the growth of the girls. The castle, a place of silent solitude for millennia, was filled with new sounds, the patter of small feet on the obsidian floors, the echoes of laughter in the long corridors, the endless, curious questions of 3 bright, growing minds. Cassius was not a father in the human sense of the word. He was something more. He was a teacher, a guardian, a living library. He did not give them toys, he gave them puzzles crafted by forgotten artisans. He did not sing them lullabies, he recited the epic poems of fallen empires in their original tongues. He taught them to read the stars not from charts, but from the crystal dome of the great hall. He taught them to track not deer, but the subtle shifts of shadow and light. He was patient, endlessly so, his ancient stillness a perfect counterpoint to their youthful energy. Genevieve, too, found a new purpose. She was no longer a queen, a decorative vessel for a king's lineage. She was a mother. She taught them the things Cassius could not, the warmth of an embrace, the stories of her own childhood, the nuances of a human heart. She and Ileana raised them, a strange trinity of caregivers, a human queen, an ancient vampire, and a woman who stood somewhere in between. Genevieve's grief for the life she had lost faded, replaced by a fierce, protective love for the life they were building. She advised Cassius, her knowledge of courtly intrigue and human politics proving invaluable. She was not his consort, but his confidant, his partner in this strange, unprecedented parenthood. The girls grew, each a distinct facet of a single, brilliant gem. Seraphina, with her mother's calm and Cassius' intellect, was the strategist. She devoured the books in the library, her mind a natural fortress of logic and planning. She spent hours with Cassius, playing games of chess with pieces carved from obsidian and moonlight, her mind learning to think 10 moves ahead, to see patterns in chaos. She was the anchor, the calm center of their storm. Isolde was the warrior. She was restless, filled with a fiery energy that could not be contained by books. She possessed a supernatural strength and speed, a gift from the ambient magic of the castle, or perhaps from Cassius' own nature, which seemed to seep into the very stones. It was she who first asked for a sword. Cassius did not hesitate. He began her training himself, not with brute force, but with the deadly grace of a predator. He taught her to move like a whisper, to strike like lightning. She was the blade, the sharp edge of their will. And Elara was the shadow. Quiet and watchful, she was the most attuned to the strange magic of Castle Nocturne. Her senses were preternaturally sharp. She could hear a spider spinning its web in the rafters, smell a storm on the wind a day before it arrived, see the faintest trail left on stone. She moved through the castle's hidden passages like a ghost, her knowledge of its secrets second only to Cassius' own. She was their eyes and ears, the unseen presence that knew all. One evening, when they were perhaps 13 years of age by human reckoning, the three of them found Cassius in the great hall, standing beneath the stardome. He was gazing up at the constellations, his posture conveying a loneliness so vast it seemed to absorb the light around him. It was Seraphina who spoke, her voice clear in the silence. "You are not our father, are you?" It was not an accusation, but a statement of fact, a puzzle piece she had finally fitted into place. Cassius turned, his ancient eyes meeting hers. He did not lie to them. He had never lied to them. "No, child. I am not." "Who was he?" Isolde asked, her hand resting on the hilt of the training sword at her hip. Her voice was tight, a coiled spring. "The man who gave us life." Cassius' gaze swept over the three of them, the thinker, the fighter, the watcher. They were no longer children. They were young women, forged in the twilight of his kingdom, possessing a strength and wisdom that belied their years. They deserved the truth. All of it. He sat on the steps of a raised dais, and they gathered at his feet, just as they had when they were small. Genevieve, who had entered the hall silently, stood in the shadows, her heart aching. She had known this day would come. "His name is Leopold," Cassius began, his voice a low murmur. "He is a king of men. And he is your father." He told them everything. He told them of their birth, of their mother's courage, of Leopold's obsession with a male heir. He told them of the journey to the frozen border, of the biting wind and the king's cruel words. He did not soften the story or spare them the details. He spoke of how Leopold had called them useless burdens, how he had ordered them left in the snow to die. He spoke of the phrase "take the trash," and as he said the words, a low growl rumbled in his chest, the memory of the insult still potent after all these years. As he spoke, he watched them. He saw Seraphina's face become a mask of cold, controlled fury, her mind already processing, analyzing, planning. He saw Isolde's knuckles turn white as she gripped her sword, her eyes blazing with a desperate, violent grief for the babies they had been. And he saw Elara's gaze become distant, as if she were looking back through time, seeing the scene with her own preternatural senses, feeling the cold on her own skin. When he finished, a heavy silence filled the hall. The stars above seemed to watch, cold and indifferent. "Why?" Elara whispered, her voice barely audible. "Why would he do that?" "Because he is small," Cassius answered, the words simple but profound. "He is a man ruled by fear. Fear of his own legacy. Fear of being seen as weak. And you, my daughters, were a reflection of his own inadequacy. He did not cast you out because you were weak. He cast you out because he was." He looked at Genevieve, who now stepped forward into the moonlight, her face a portrait of sorrow and strength. "He did not know you," she said, her voice trembling but firm as she knelt before her daughters. She took their hands, Seraphina's cool and steady, Isolde's tense and hot, Elara's light as a bird's wing. "He never saw the fire in your hearts, the brilliance in your minds. His loss was absolute." Isolde pulled her hand away. "He is not a loss. He is a debt. and it needs to be paid. Her voice was like the rasp of steel on stone. Vengeance is a hollow meal, Isolde, Cassius cautioned gently. This isn't vengeance, Seraphina said, her voice cutting through the emotion with chilling clarity. She looked from her sister to her mother, and then to the vampire who had been their only true father. It's about justice. It's about the kingdom he is running into the ground. It's about every other daughter he has deemed worthless, every subject he has treated as disposable. He didn't just throw us away. He threw away his own future. We are not going back to reclaim a father. We are going back to reclaim a throne. In her eyes, Cassius saw the reflection of the stars above, cold, clear, and utterly determined. He saw the queen she was born to be. He looked at Isolde, the general who would lead their armies, and Alara, the spymaster who would pave their way. They were not broken things, salvaged from the snow. They were weapons. They were queens. And he, the ancient, lonely king of shadows, had raised them. A quiet, fierce pride, an emotion he had not felt in 1,000 years, bloomed in his still heart. Then your training is not yet complete, he said, a faint, dangerous smile touching his lips for the first time. He wanted a king to be his heir. We will give him 3 queens instead. The world outside of the grey marches continued to turn, oblivious to the storm gathering in its misty heart. Another decade passed. The girls became women, their skills honed to a razor's edge. Seraphina could now beat Cassius at chess 1 game in 4, a feat no living being had accomplished in 5 centuries. Isolde moved with a silent, lethal grace, her blade a blur of silver in the moonlight, her strength now rivaling that of Cassius' own guard. Alara could slip through the castle unseen even by her sisters, and could read the faintest traces of passage, a disturbed pebble, a faint scent on the air, as easily as Seraphina read a book. News from Leopold's kingdom trickled in through the merchants and refugees who sometimes strayed near the borders of the marches. The stories were always the same. Leopold had eventually remarried, a young, terrified princess who had given him the son he craved. But the boy was sickly and weak, and Leopold's obsession with him blinded him to the rot infesting his kingdom. The harvests failed. Taxes soared to pay for the king's increasingly lavish tournaments and hunts. Dissent was crushed with brutal efficiency. The kingdom was a barrel of dry powder, waiting for a spark. The spark came on a winter morning, 28 years after they had been cast out. A scout from one of Cassius' border patrols brought word. A famine in the southern provinces had led to a peasant revolt. Leopold, in his paranoia, had not sent grain. He had sent soldiers. A massacre had followed. The people were no longer just miserable, they were desperate. And desperation was the mother of revolution. That night, they gathered in the great hall, no longer as a teacher and his students, but as a council of war. A massive map of Leopold's kingdom was spread across the obsidian floor, illuminated by the cold starlight from above. Genevieve, her hair now streaked with silver, stood beside Cassius, her expression grim. The 3 sisters stood opposite them, clad not in gowns but in black leather and steel, their faces set and serious. They were a terrifyingly beautiful sight, 3 aspects of the coming night. The kingdom is brittle, Seraphina began, her finger tracing a river on the map. His garrisons are stretched thin, quelling unrest. His treasury is nearly empty. The nobles are discontent, but too afraid to act alone. He is a king of ashes, ruling from a throne of fear. Fear can be broken, Isolde stated, her hand resting on the pommel of her sword. A swift strike at the heart. We march on the capital, take the castle, and put his head on a spike. The nobles will fall in line. No, Alara said, her voice a soft counterpoint to Isolde's fire. She knelt, placing a small, dark stone on a town near the southern border. We don't strike at the head. We offer a hand. The people in the south are starving. They have been butchered by their king. They don't need another conqueror. They need a savior. Genevieve nodded, her eyes shining with pride. Ilara is right. You cannot win a kingdom with swords alone. You must win its heart. Cassius listened, a silent observer. This was their war, their decision. He had given them the tools, the knowledge, the strength. Now, they had to choose how to wield them. Seraphina looked at her sisters, a silent communication passing between them. They were more than siblings, they were a single unit, their minds and spirits intertwined. "Ilara will go first," she declared, her voice ringing with newfound authority. "She will move through the southern provinces, unseen. She will listen. She will learn the names of the rebel leaders, the state of their supplies, the morale of the king's soldiers. She will be our eyes." She turned to Isolde. "You will follow with a small, elite force of Cassius Guard. Not as an army, but as relief. We will bring food from our own stores. We will not demand fealty. We will offer aid. We will show them we are not Leopold." "And you?" Isolde asked. "I will come last," Serafina said. "When the people are fed, when their hope has been rekindled, I will speak with their leaders. I will forge an alliance. We will not take the throne by force. We will be given it, by a populace that chooses us over the tyrant who abandoned them." She looked at Cassius. "It is a slower path. A more dangerous one. But it is the right one." A slow smile spread across Cassius' face. It was a smile of pure, paternal pride. "It is the path of a true queen," he said. "And I will give you everything you need to walk it." Ilara left that night, a ghost melting into the shadows. She moved with an unnatural speed, a phantom in the twilight lands between the marches and the kingdom. For weeks, no word came. The silence in the castle was heavy with anticipation. Isolde drilled her company of vampires, their movements silent and precise in the castle's courtyards. Serafina and Genevieve spent their days poring over the maps, planning supply lines, drafting proclamations, designing a new kingdom on paper while Ilara scouted the old one. When Ilara's message finally came, it was not carried by a raven, but by a whisper on the wind, a secret she had taught only Cassius to hear. "The people are broken, but their leaders have iron in their spines. The king's soldiers are hungry and demoralized. The south is ripe. They pray for a miracle." Isolde marched. Her force was not large, only 50 of Cassius' immortal guard, but they moved with the speed of a winter storm. They fell upon the king's garrisons not like an army, but like a plague. One moment, a fort was fully manned. The next, it was silent, its soldiers vanished into the night, its gates thrown open. They did not sack towns, they liberated them. And behind them came the supply wagons, laden with grain, medicine, and warm blankets from the deep vaults of Castle Nocturne. The effect was cataclysmic. To the starving, terrified people of the south, it was as if the gods themselves had answered their prayers. Whispers of the ghost warriors and the shadow guard spread like wildfire. They were led, it was said, by a warrior maiden with eyes like burning coals and a sword that moved faster than sight. She did not demand their loyalty. She fought for their freedom. She fed their children. She was the miracle they had prayed for. When Serafina and Genevieve finally arrived, they were not met with suspicion, but with a throng of cheering, weeping people. They rode not as conquerors, but as returning heroines. Serafina, regal and composed, met with the rebel leaders. She did not make promises of power or wealth. She spoke of justice, of fair laws, of a kingdom where no child would be left to starve in the snow. She spoke with her mother's compassion and Cassius' unshakable authority. When she told them who she was, the daughter of the king who had ordered their massacre, they did not recoil. They saw the beautiful, poetic justice of it. The stone the builder had rejected had returned to become the cornerstone. One by one, the southern provinces pledged their allegiance to her and her sisters. Their army swelled, no longer just a small vampire contingent, but thousands of human soldiers, farmers and blacksmiths and merchants, all marching under the new banner of the three-headed serpent, a sigil Serafina had designed to represent herself and her sisters. The news reached King Leopold in his capital. He flew into a rage. A trio of witches, he called them. Demonic pretenders led by a renegade vampire. He dispatched his finest general and the bulk of his army to crush the rebellion. The two armies met in the valley of the Red River. Leopold's forces were larger, better armored. But they were fighting for a king they feared, for a wage that was often late. Serafina's army was fighting for their homes, for their children, for a future they had not dared to dream of. They were led by a general, Isolde, who could not be killed by mortal steel, and guided by a scout, Ilara, who knew the king's army's every move before they made it. The battle was short and brutal. Isolde did not meet the king's army head-on. On the eve of the fight, Ilara slipped through the enemy camp, a whisper of poison in the ears of the conscripted soldiers, a promise of mercy for those who laid down their arms. Isolde and her vampires then struck the command tents at midnight, a surgical strike that decapitated the army's leadership. When the sun rose, the king's army awoke to find their generals slain and a rebel army poised on the ridge above them. Thousands surrendered without a single sword being drawn in the morning light. The rest broke and fled. The path to the capital was open. Leopold's kingdom had not just been defeated, it had dissolved. The foundations of fear had crumbled, and his power had evaporated with it. They marched on the capital not as an army, but as a procession. The city gates were thrown open from the inside. The people lined the streets, throwing flowers at their feet. They had come not to conquer, but to reclaim. The throne room was dark and smelled of stale wine and fear. King Leopold sat on his great throne, no longer a fearsome tyrant, but a shrunken, pallid old man. His fine clothes hung on his thinning frame. His remaining guards had deserted him. He was alone, save for his whimpering, teenage son, who hid behind the throne. Genevieve entered first, her posture erect, her face calm. Leopold stared, his eyes widening in disbelief. "Genevieve. You are dead." "I was meant to be," she said, her voice even. "But you are a careless man, Leopold. You failed to ensure the task was done." Then her daughters entered, flanking her. Serafina, in her burnished black armor, radiating quiet authority. Isolde, her hand on her sword, a predator savoring the final moments of the hunt. Ilara, a silent shadow at her sister's side, her eyes missing nothing. They were magnificent. They were terrifying. They were his. Leopold's jaw worked, but no sound came out. He stared at their faces, seeing the echoes of his own features twisted into something powerful and strange, combined with the ghost of the wife he had tried to destroy. What are you?" he finally croaked. "We are the daughters you threw away," Serafina said, her voice not loud, but it filled the vast, silent hall. "We are the useless burdens you left to die in the snow." Recognition dawned, followed swiftly by a wave of sputtering, incredulous rage. "Lies. Witchcraft. I have a son. A true heir." He shoved the trembling boy forward. Here is the future of this kingdom." Isolde let out a short, harsh laugh. "That sniveling boy. He is not the future. He is the last gasp of a failed past. We are the future." Leopold scrambled from his throne, drawing a decorative sword from his belt. It trembled in his old, weak hand. "Demons. I will send you back to whatever hell spawned you." He lunged, not at the armored warriors, but at Genevieve. It was the act of a cornered rat, lashing out at the source of his original wound. He never reached her. A blur of midnight motion intervened. Cassius materialized between them, his hand catching Leopold's wrist in an unbreakable grip. The sword clattered to the floor. The Vampire King had not been seen during the entire campaign, remaining a shadow in the background. But now, in the final moment, he revealed himself. His eyes glowed with a soft, crimson light, and his presence filled the room with an ancient, terrifying power. "You will not touch her." Cassius' voice was a low growl, the sound of a tomb door grinding shut. "You will not touch any of them." Ever again he squeezed, and the sound of bones crunching echoed in the hall. Leopold screamed, a thin, reedy sound, and collapsed to his knees, clutching his shattered hand. Cassius looked down at the pathetic man, his face a mask of cold contempt. "I told you this day would come, mortal. The day you would beg for a mercy you do not deserve." Leopold looked up, his face streaked with tears of pain and terror. He looked past Cassius to the three powerful women standing before him. His daughters. The treasure he had thrown away. He saw the kingdom he had lost, the legacy he had squandered. He saw the abyss of his own failure. And in their eyes, he saw no hatred. He saw no rage. He saw nothing at all. He saw the cold, clear, dispassionate judgment of a queen. "The throne is ours," Serafina announced, her voice the tolling of a great bell. by birthright and by conquest. Your reign is over. They did not kill him. Death would have been a release. They imprisoned him in the highest tower of the castle, the same one from which he had once looked out over a kingdom he thought was his forever. His only visitor was Genevieve, who would come once a week to read to him from the histories of the realm, her calm voice a constant reminder of all he had lost. His son was sent to a monastery, to live a life of quiet contemplation, free from the poison of his father's ambition. The three sisters ruled together, a triumvirate of wisdom, strength, and vision. Seraphina was the mind, her laws just and her policies wise. Isolde was the shield, her armies keeping the peace and protecting the borders. Ilara was the heart, her network of spies becoming a network of aid, ensuring no one in the kingdom was ever forgotten or left behind. They healed the land their father had broken. One evening, months after their coronation, Cassius found Seraphina in the throne room. She was not on the throne, but standing by a high window, looking out at the lights of the city coming on as dusk fell. "It is a beautiful sight," he said, coming to stand beside her. "It is a heavy weight," she replied, not turning. "Every light is a life. A responsibility. A weight you were born to carry." She was silent for a long moment. Then she turned to him, her eyes, so like his in their intensity, searching his face. "You could have taken this kingdom for yourself 1,000 times over. Why did you not?" Cassius looked out at the city, at the world of men he had watched for so long. "A crown is a cage, my daughter. I have always valued my freedom. But," he added, his voice softening, "I have never seen one worn so well as you and your sisters wear yours." He reached out, his pale hand gently brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. It was the same gesture he had used when she was a babe in his palm, a gesture of profound, paternal love. He thought a son would be his legacy, Seraphina whispered, a tear she did not know was there tracing a path down her cheek. "He was a fool." "He was," Cassius agreed. He looked at the strong, brilliant, compassionate queen before him. He thought of her fierce sister, and her watchful one. He thought of the mother who had loved them against all odds. Because a king's true legacy is not the child who carries his name. It is the world he leaves behind. And the world they were building, a world of justice and hope, born from a night of snow and despair, was a legacy greater than any king could ever dream of.